CySA Plus simulation exam questions. Domain 1, Threat and Vulnerability Management, Part 5. So here we will cover 10 more questions from this Domain 1 for the CySA Plus certification exam. So we are on still on Domain 1, Threat and Vulnerability Management, which is worth 22% of the questions of the exam. Question 41. Recently, one of your employees was discovered to be conducting hacking activities from inside the network. When he was taken into custody, he had just executed the following command. And so here is the command. Let's take a look at that. So ns lookup DNS3 yourcompany.com set type any LSD. Which of the following steps in reconnaissance was he attempting? The correct answer is C, DNS harvesting. He was attempting DNS harvesting. This is an attack that attempts to obtain all DNS records from a DNS server, typically by convincing the server to perform an unauthorized zone transfer. This can be attempted from the command line using the following command, which is basically what he was trying to do. He is not attempting service discovery, which is the process of identifying whether a service is operational on a device and whether the service is protected by a firewall. He's not attempting social media profiling either. This part of reconnaissance consists of using the organization's social media account or the social media accounts of company employees to obtain useful information about the organization or its network. And finally, he's not attempting topology discovery either, because this is the process of identifying all devices in the network and the relation to one another and to the infrastructure devices like routers and switches. Question 42. Which of the following attempts to exploit vulnerabilities? The correct answer is C, penetration test. A penetration test, often called a pen test, attempts to exploit vulnerabilities. It is designed to simulate an attack on a system, a network, or an application. Its value lies in its potential to discover security holes that may have gone unnoticed. It differs from a vulnerability test in that it attempts to exploit vulnerabilities rather than to simply identify them. A vulnerability test does not attempt to exploit vulnerability. It simply identifies them. A risk assessment does not attempt to exploit vulnerabilities either. Risk assessments attempt to identify vulnerabilities and adopt controls that address the vulnerabilities or at least reduce the risk to an acceptable level. And a poor scan does not attempt to exploit vulnerabilities either. While it can be a step in a penetration test, as it usually is, by itself it locates open ports, but it does not attempt to exploit them. Question 43. You are your company's security analyst. As part of your job duties, you must configure the company's vulnerability management solution to perform credential scans of certain servers. Which permission should you assign to account used for the vulnerability scans? The correct answer is A, read only. The account used for vulnerability scans should be assigned read-only permissions. Credential scans only require read-only access to target servers. You should follow the principle of least privilege and limit the access available to the scanner. all of the other permissions grant access rights that are not necessary to perform the scans and may result in security issues. Question 44. You are reviewing the report submitted by a penetration tester. In the report, she states that when she used Nmap to scan for the state of ports on the device at 192.168.5.5, she received a state of filtered for port 80. What does that state mean? The correct answer is C. The port is being blocked by a firewall. When a port is reported by Nmap to be in a filtered state, it means that the request for the port was blocked by a firewall before the request reached the host. When the host at the address is accepting connections to that port, the state will be reported as open. When the application operating on that port is not available to accept connections, the state will be reported as closed. And when the state of the port cannot be determined, it will be reported as unfiltered. Question 45. You are examining a server that has undergone a SQL injection attack. Which server is most likely the victim of this attack? The correct answer here is A, database server. A database server is most likely the victim in a SQL injection attack. A SQL injection attack inserts a SQL query as the input from the client to the application. The purpose of this attack is to read sensitive data from the database, modify the data, execute administrative operations on the database, recover the content of a given file, and even issue commands to the operating system. The web server is usually the means whereby the SQL injection attack is delivered, but it is not really the victim of the attack. A web server is most likely the victim of cross-site and cross-site request forgery attacks. A file server is not the victim of this attack. A file server is more likely to become a victim of a directory traversal or some other access attack. And an email server is not the victim of this type of attacks either. An email server is more likely to become a victim of a denial of service or DOS attack. Question 46. The organization hired a penetration tester to assess the vulnerability of the network. You have been assigned the task of assigning her in this process as a learning exercise. You observe her opening a command line and executing the following command. And the command is this: dig afxr dns3 yourcompany.com. What type of attack is she attempting? The correct answer is B, DNS harvesting. The penetration tester is attempting a DNS harvesting attack. This is an attack that attempts to obtain the entire DNS records from a DNS server, typically by convincing the server to perform an unauthorized zone transfer. In this case, she is using a Linux command to do so. This can be attempted from the command line using the following command: dig space afxr and then the name of the server. She is not attempting service discovery, which is the process of identifying whether a service is operational on a device and whether the device is protected by a firewall. She's not attempting a denial of service attack either, and she's not attempting email harvesting. In email harvesting, can be done through other approaches like through social engineering, by buying lists from other spammers, by accessing the emails and address books in another user's computer, and by hacking websites. And we've talked about this before. Question 47. In which type of test is the testing team provided with limited knowledge of the network system and devices? The correct answer here is D, a blind test. In a blind test, the testing team is provided with limited knowledge of the network systems and devices. They are only given publicly available information. The organization security team knows that an attack is coming. This test requires more effort by the testing team, and the testing team must simulate an actual attack. A double-blind test resembles a blind test, except that in a double-blind, the organization security team does not know that an attack is coming. Only a few individuals at the organization know about the attack, and they do not share this information with the security team. This test usually requires equal effort from both the testing team and the organization's security team. In a target test, both the testing team and the organization security team are given maximum information about the network and the type of test that will occur. This is the easiest test to complete, but will not provide a full picture of the organization's security. A regression test is a test performed on software after a change is made to validate the functionality. Question 48. Your boss needs assistance with some network reconnaissance activities. Using a tool called Nmap, he has executed the following command. And here we got Nmap with the O parameter, scanme.yourcompany.org. Which of the following steps in Reconnaissance is he performing? In Reconnaissance, right? Is he performing? Correct answer is B, operating system fingerprinting. Your boss is performing operating system or OS fingerprinting. When a scan is done with the nmap-o command, the scan will attempt to determine the version of operating system running on the hosts. In this case, it is targeted to all hosts in the yourcompany.org domain. With this information, a hacker can attempt to leverage common vulnerabilities exhibited by the operating system. Your boss is not attempting service discovery, which is the process of identifying whether a service is operational on a device and whether the device is protected by a firewall. The O option does not do that. Your boss is not attempting social media profiling either. Your boss is not attempting topology discovery either. We talked about that. So Nmap is a scanning tool. So at this point, you should be familiar with Nmap. But Nmap is a scanning tool that can be used for a variety of operations by using the proper switches and commands. So here's some examples. Again, for the operating system, it's O. Identify host name. You can use the SL switch. TCP SYN and UDP scan. You can use the dash lowercase s, uppercase s, and for the TCP SYN and lowercase s, and then uppercase U for UDP, and then also the PN for the port numbers. Question of 49. Which of the following is not an item considered during the establishment of the rules of engagement? The correct answer is C, compensation. Compensation is not an item considered during the establishment of the rules of engagement. That is covered in the service level agreement or SLA. The rules of engagement define how penetration testing should occur. These are issues that should be settled and agreed upon before any testing begins. Items settled during establishment of the rules of engagement include the timing, in the time when the test will occur, and a specification of any times that it cannot be performed. A scope, which identifies the machines or parts of the network that can be scanned and the type of scan to be performed. Authorization provides both written authorization and legal authority to perform the scan. Exploitation lists and authorizes any exploits that may be attempted. Communication lists the contacts at the organization with whom the testers should communicate and the methods of communication that should be used. And finally, reporting, which lists the types of reports to be generated and their methods of distribution. Question 50. As part of your company's comprehensive vulnerability scanning policy, you decide to perform a passive vulnerability scan on one of your company's subnetworks. Which statement is true of this scan? The correct answer here is B. It impacts the hosts and network less than other scan types. A passive scan impacts the host and network less than any other scan types. To perform a more in-depth analysis than other scan types, you would perform an active scan. To include the appropriate permissions for the different data types, you should perform a credential scan. A non-credential scan does operate within the context of a user account. The appropriate permissions may be needed to be able to access all the data and application on devices. Permissions and access to the entire host are provided with a credential scan. Although not always possible, limiting a scan to a particular operating system can be done with an agent-based scan. With an agent-based scan, agents are installed on devices. These agents then send scan reports back to a central agent. In a server-based scan, the scanner runs from a server that then scans all the devices. Agent-based scanning is considered better than server-based scanning because it has less impact on the network. But an agent-based scan usually has more of an impact on the device on which the agent is installed. All right, so this is the conclusion of part 5 of the Domain 1 Threat and Vulnerability Management for this simulation questions to prepare you for the CySA Plus certification exam. Next, we will complete this Domain 1 with part 6 of this series of videos.